Hello, CMST 320. My name is Brendon Favre, and we're going to see if this is actually going to record and save this time. I apologize in advance if you can hear my 2-year-old upstairs. She is not in a very good mood. So let's go ahead and get into it. Chapter 2, Question 1. Explain the two categories of functional approach to leadership. All right, the two categories the text talks about as the functional approaches to leadership are task function and process function. These are found in section 2.1.2 of our text. And the text defines task function as leadership behaviors that help a team get work done, such as delegating duties, facilitating meetings, and making sure that all employees are properly trained on tasks. In my opinion, the most important part of task function is making sure that all employees are properly trained on the tasks. This is important because it will assist leadership in getting the work done. If you're properly trained on something, then you really shouldn't require any supervision at all. You should just be able to get the task done. And this will also assist in delegating tasks. If you're trained on something, then they know who they can put on those tasks. If leadership knows who is trained on tasks, it will assist them in planning and scheduling as well. It will also give them an idea on where more training is needed and where cross-training can be done appropriately. Again, this is important. If you're not properly trained on a task, they're obviously not going to want to put you on that task if time importance, or they're going to want to make sure you're being supervised on that task. You want to be properly trained on a task because it could result in injury or a number of other things if you're not properly trained. So it's just best to ensure that you're properly trained on something before you attempt to do it. All right, process function are those behaviors that leaders engage in to maintain a harmonious climate by appropriately managing conflict and rewarding work teams when goals are reached. All right, incentives are a good motivator to help people get people to work harder to meet deadlines. Also, maintaining a positive work environment will lead to more productive workers, in my opinion. A happy workplace is a productive workplace. If you've got rumors spreading around all over the place, or you've got, conflict between employees, or, whatever going on, it's going to affect everybody around them. It's going to affect the company as a whole. They have the saying is one bad apple can ruin the bunch. So I always try to keep that in mind. Handling things at the lowest level, in my opinion, is the best way to do it. As soon as you see something going on, you step in and you take care of it right then before it has time to escalate any further. These functional approaches will help develop leaders because it will force them to learn what motivates their employees. Whatever that may be, it's important for leaders to understand that what their employees want, what drives them to do their best job, whether that might be customer satisfaction, money, time off like a long weekend, a parking spot. I mean, it could be a number of different things, and providing other incentives as well, maybe having lunch catered one week, or, there's just a number of different things you could do just trying to keep your employees happy. Again, a happy workplace is a productive workplace, in my opinion. All right, question number 3. According to the authors, what is meant by power? All right, in section 2.4, they define power as the ability to influence others' behavior. All right, now what this means to me is that just because you hold a status or a title does not necessarily mean you have power. If you're unable to influence and motivate workers, then you're failing to lead them. Based off the book's definition, leadership is defined by the text as the process of influencing others through communication. So if you're unable to communicate, then you're unable to lead. So effective communication directly leads to how you're influencing others and how you lead them. So take it as you will. In section 2.4.1, the text identifies 5 sources of organizational power. The first being legitimate power. And this is being appointed or elected. So that would be like if you sat on a board position with like an HOA or something like that. Anything that you have to be elected into would be example of legitimate power. Referent power, that comes from being well liked. I can equate this to running for class president in high school. basically a popularity contest. So it, again, comes from being well-liked. Expert power is being knowledgeable about issues or ideas. And this would be like if you were an architect responsible for building a structure. Obviously, if you're going to be building a building or something like that, you're not going to want to put an accountant or somebody that has no experience in that field. You want to go with somebody that knows what they're doing. The next being reward power is the ability to give gifts, recognition, or other rewards valued by group members, such as performance bonuses or employee of the month would be a couple of examples of that. And lastly, coercive power. And this is the ability to punish others. A lot of us in the military had coercive power, especially in leadership roles. This could be corrective training or mopping floors or something like that. In the business world, this could equate to verbal warnings or actual write-ups, or even being fired or suspended, or anything around that sort. All right, Chapter 14. What are the most important tips offered in Chapter 14 that can help you be a better writer? One of the most important tips I found in Chapter 14 was being able to appropriately organize a document. As you want your writing to be organized, you don't want to have thoughts or ideas scattered throughout the paper. This is discussed in section 14.1.1. You want to make sure you're organizing everything. You don't want to, if you need to reference back to things, that's all right. But for the most part, you want to have everything structured so it has a nice flow to it. So you're not jumping back and forth, flipping pages back and forth. You don't have scattered ideas. You're not going back and forth to things. Just being well organized, well articulated is very important. The next being tone. Tone is important because that is the message is being communicated, and you want to make sure that it's done properly. You don't want your message to come across as confrontational or accusatory if that's not what you're meaning to do. For me, tone, especially when corresponding through emails and stuff like that, it's extremely hard for me to pick up on. I don't have the verbal cues or the nonverbal cues, such as body language or posture, tone of voice, those types of things to go off of. You're just solely going off of what is written. So it's important, to maybe read your email through a couple of times, or whatever message you're going to send out a couple of times, and possibly even have somebody else read it. I know I have my wife read over things a couple of times before I send them, especially emails, to make sure that I'm not coming across as hostile or it's not going to be construed that way. The next being avoid using biased language. This is outlined in 14.1.2 of the text. And today this is more important than ever, as I'm sure y'all can understand. As we push for equality, it's more important that we do our best to avoid offending anyone. And we try to be as inclusive as we possibly can. An example of this would be by removing gender pronouns. We're being more exclusive. So an example of that would be instead of using the term fireman, use the term firefighter, because we're being all inclusive with that. We're not just using man in there, signaling that it's only a male profession, or if you're not a man in that position, then you're somehow inferior. Lastly is clarity. And in my opinion, this could be the most important thing I took away from Chapter 14. If you're unable to clearly get your message to its intended target, then the entire process is a failure. If your message isn't getting across, then the communication isn't being established, and nothing's going to get done. This is outlined in section 14.1.3 of the text. And again, I feel it is probably one of the most important things. I think what a lot of people do is they like to add a lot of fluff to their writing. They like to add a lot of extra words in there to give it that length. From what I have found to help make sure that a message is clear, is I have found that, less is more. Eliminating the fluff really helps keep things organized. It keeps it direct, and it keeps it to the point. You only want to provide the necessary information. I believe that by only providing the facts, being direct, and providing only the information that's necessary, it helps eliminate a lot of confusion on the other end. They don't have to try to interpret what you're saying. They don't have to guess. It's just cut and dry. All right. Question 2 from Chapter 14. Based on the tips offered in Chapter 14, what are your personal greatest strengths and weaknesses as a writer? This is kind of difficult for me because a lot of my strengths are also my weaknesses. Again, we know ourselves and we're always seeking self-improvement. So a lot of these is I can take them to extremes, whereas they could be beneficial, but when you take them too far, they can actually hinder you more than help you. I would say one of my greatest strengths is being able to be direct and to the point. It's nice when being able to be direct and to the point because you're able to get your message across clearly. And clarity, again, as I had said in the previous question, is one of the most important parts of the chapter that I've found. You're providing all the necessary information to answer any questions that person might have, but not so much information that you're going to create more questions or a gray area that could lead to uncertainty. You're being direct. You're providing that information. Now, how this could also be a weakness is at times I can be too direct and to the point where I can come off as hostile or rude or confrontational when actually I'm just trying to get the mission accomplished. Another strength I would say would be my ability to know what delivery method is best for a message. Is email okay, or should this be done face to face? I think today a lot of stuff is avoided. I think people are afraid of talking to people. They don't want to talk to people face to face. It's easier to send an email. It's less, they can be, kind of keyboard warriors. I know a term that's been brought up a lot. I always prefer to do things face to face, and especially when it comes to like disciplinary things or counseling or something like that. I feel it's best to do those things face to face, and it's not something you should be sending over an email or a text. You give that person the courtesy of sitting down with them, giving them your time, so they know that you actually care and you're not just kind of blowing them off. Moving to weaknesses, I would say my biggest weakness is I can tend to use a telegraphic style of communication. And what I mean by this is that if I'm in a hurry, I often condense a message to be very short and to the point as possible. And when I do that, I can come off as hostile or confrontational or rude, but also at times information that I feel might not be important, it may be important to others. So it might be important for the receiver. So it's again gets back to the area of clarity of providing enough information to eliminate any questions, but also not providing so much information to create more questions or gray area.